close in proximity or otherwise to people that, you know, could benefit from such a policy, like raising the wage. So I felt like I came to understand that, you know, oftentimes policymakers, people making decisions, they're so disconnected from the actual people. I saw that firsthand, but we see that often just in, you know, our political spaces, where, you know, one reason why certain policies haven't been passed for years and years is because those that are making the decision making, those that are making the decisions, they are disconnected from those that are being impacted. But one bright side about attending Duke were some of the people that I was able to take classes with. So I came to Duke with the understanding that one person I did want to take a class with was Sandy Darity. And he did not attend an HBCU, but he is one of the leading scholars around the issue of reparations. He's a Black scholar. So, you know, I had an opportunity to take the class with him. It was called Social Inequality. So being in that space, and I guess what I'm saying is, there are certain spaces you have to sit in, but in those spaces, you know, I just take what I need and leave the rest. I took what I needed from Duke, you know. I took what I needed in the sense that I learned from scholars that I thought were doing important work. In the classes where I disagreed, because I understood that, you know, the way of policy making and the way of, you know, analyzing, you know, policies and economics, it was devoid of, you know, the human voice and experience. I still appreciated that opportunity because I think it's important to know how other people think, and it's important to know how those in decision-making power think. So, you know, even though you know, there were certain challenges, I still appreciated that experience for what it taught me and for what it didn't teach me, what it taught me to avoid in my own way of thinking.
You touched on the necessity for proximity to people who are disenfranchised by policies and corrupt laws. How important that is to kind of informing your activism, and not even just your activism, but just your work that does touch people. What are current ways and ways in the past, personally, that you have, what are ways that you have remained in close proximity to people who need that that support, and how have you like navigated that, especially because, you know, you are successful and you don't need to be in those spaces, but how have you kind of remained in those spaces and like
I would say one thing that I am proud of myself about is that, you know, and it's partly because of the way I was raised, but that I can navigate any space. And so I'm intentional about making sure that I have friends who have different experiences. I have friends that, you know, don't have college education or perhaps have the experience of being formerly incarcerated, things like that. And in doing so, I learn from the people that I'm, you know, surrounded by, continuing to be engaged. So, you know, one reason why I would love when I would, growing up, I would attend rallies and, you know, protests and things like that. What I would love was hearing the stories of impacted people. A lot of the times people focus on who they think is the most important. So they will focus on, you know, whoever they perceive to be the leader. But it's my experience that the most impactful voices are always those who are the most marginalized. So when I went to actions and I would hear, for instance, you know, a mom talking about how her child died because they didn't have access to health care, you know, or low-wage workers talking about how, you know, they do not make enough to survive, or, you know, formerly incarcerated people talking about how they still struggle to get housing because of so many efforts to just block their access to basic things. And any time that I'm able to, you know, be in those spaces, I'm always intentional about just listening. I think that's so important.
It seems as though your reformative work is really centered around amplifying the voices of those who are left unheard, like you said, which automatically decenters whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And that is important because this is so defiant of you. May 30th, 2017, if we can go back to that date, you were amongst a group of protesters at the state legislative building who were arrested.
Yeah.
What was your cause?
I believe, if I'm thinking of the right one, I believe that was a healthcare rally.
Right.
Yes. And so, yes. And so, you know, at the time, of course, one thing we were advocating for was, at the time, North Carolina still had not expanded Medicaid. By now, it finally did last year. But even beyond that, there are so many people that do not have healthcare access because it's so unattainable. Even if you do have access to healthcare, oftentimes it's still unaffordable, you know, to pay for it. So that was an issue that's always been, you know, critical to me. And, you know, I allowed myself, you know, to commit civil disobedience because I just believe that that's a right everybody deserves. It was very powerful joining with, you know, others that were there that day, because we were literally just saying, we were calling on our policymakers, our legislatures, to find it upon themselves, you know, to enact, you know, more robust healthcare legislation, to pass Medicaid expansion. You know, it took over 10 years for the state to do it. And in that time, thousands of people died. So yeah, that was a cause. And I think that's always going to be a cause that's very close to my heart, because I do have those moments where, you know, I remember, you know, being in a hospital bed, you know, and I remember seeing all those people. I remember many times waiting in emergency rooms and seeing people and understanding that, you know, there's just such a huge need, and healthcare is something